everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning or this afternoon. And welcome to our first episode of the BlackOut series, proudly brought to you by Black creatives out there. My name is Diane Wesh, and I'm super honored to be your host for this series, which will be held every Sunday for the next 13 weeks. I hail from Virginia Beach, Virginia, the 757, and I'm the proud product of tough Haitian immigrants. I'm also an inclusive marketing consultant and the founder of Got Blacklisted. As you all know, we're not here to sugarcoat the hard stuff, but rather to share our stories, our collective truths. We'll dive deep into art, COVID-19, the Black Lives Matter movement, and more. Some of the issues that we may discuss might be a bit sensitive, and they deal with a lot of mental health issues, but we do believe that these topics are necessary. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments below. And now, allow me to introduce our first guest, based in Auckland, Poata Alvie McKree, a performance installation artist, Qoya teacher, playwright, and proud Black Māori woman. Welcome, Alvie. Would you like to introduce? Would you like to introduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure. Tēnā no tātou katoa, he uri tēnei no ngāpuhi, no ngā tikahu ki whangaroa hoki, ko mā tātua waka, no māmaru waka anō. Ko Poata Alvie McKree tōku ingoa. Kia ora, I'm Alvie. I've just given you my whakapapa taha Māori on my Māori side. On my father's side, I am from the Caribbean, from Udamain, also known as St. Vincent, and from the island of Barbados.
Mm.
And yes, I live in Auckland, in Piha.
Yes.
So happy to be in Piha right now.
Good. Oh my gosh, how are you liking this weather right now? Even though
Loving
we are,
it.
Yes, good. Even though we are kind of in level 3, but I mean, it's still a good day.
I feel like half of Auckland is outside my front door. You can't even get out the driveway. Like everybody's here hanging.
Awesome. So glad you're doing good. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So as I just stated, now that we are in currently in level 3 lockdown due to COVID-19, how are you currently feeling and how is your art transitioning during this period?
You know, if I'm honest, I am more anxious this time than I was last time. I think last time I teach part-time at Elam School of Fine Arts, and so I was busy trying to adapt to having to switch all of our studio teaching to online teaching, and that was a 5-day-a-week drama, and then managing children at home, homeschooling, online teaching. So there was a lot to do to kind of cope with what was going on, and there wasn't as much time to be in a contemplative space thinking about what all of this means and the impact it will have on people, particularly people of color, going forward. Now I'm much more organized in that sort of general sense, and there's much more time to really be concerned about the impact that this continued series of lockdowns is going to have on poorer communities and on people who do not have access to full-time employment and the things that make life manageable. In terms of my art, I'm really lucky. I have all the materials I need outside my front door, and if some friends and I managed to get in and out of Whanganui last weekend and attend a harakeke paper making workshop. Thank you, Marty and Marilyn. And it was amazing, and I've been able to bring that knowledge back, and now I'm here and I've got harakeke growing in my back and front yard, and I can do my work. So I'm blessed.
Great, that's so awesome to hear. So then basically, when we're dealing with like the mental perspective, would you say your art really helps you cope, especially now?
I think for me, art is and always has been a way to work through whatever I'm experiencing at the time. It's a way to process, whatever's sort of coming to the surface for me. So I don't feel it so much as a way of coping, but it is a way for me to make sense of what I'm currently going through.
Yeah. And
I often find that I will make art, and the art itself will kind of pull me through an experience and give me insight into what was really going down for me at the time, even though I might not see that truth until later on in hindsight.
Good. Yeah, thank you for that. And then I just want to just say again, for all of our viewers watching, thanks again for tuning in. And I just want to further congratulate you, Alvie, on being the first Black Māori woman to grace the cover of Canvas magazine. Not many folks actually realize what a long history Black folk have had in this country. Could you tell me what it was like growing up in the 70s as like a Black Māori woman?
Oh my God, how long have you got?
Yeah.
It's only 30 minutes, Diane.
Just give us a little bit, give us a little bit.
You know, it was two very different experiences. I was born into a Māori family that absolutely celebrated my Blackness and treated me like I was the most beautiful and magical creature on the planet. And I'm really thankful for that, because that sustained my sense of self. And it was only when I went out into the world that I began to realize that my Black skin was an issue for other people. And it was predominantly, in my experience, an issue for other Māori and other Pacific people. And that was experienced as a really quite painful, it was quite a painful thing to experience people who looked like the rest of my whānau, and so therefore, to me, felt like relatives, rejecting me on the basis of the color of my skin. And it took me a long time to come to terms with that, and to, you know, it was only really being educated into racism and what internalized racism looks like, and the way it shows up in communities of color, that I began to kind of pull myself through that and make sense of that, you know, and I was able to kind of give that back and say, no, actually, that's your stuff, not mine. You know, here, take it back now. It was difficult, and it was lonely. You know, I often tell my students the story that I never sat across the table from another Black woman until I was in my 20s.
Wow.
Like, you know, to never see your own reflection ever, it's incredibly lonely. So despite the love and the embrace of my whānau, I never got to see my own reflection. Exactly. You couldn't come home and sit at the table and go, you know, there's a vision of what Black womanhood is, and I can either accept it and model myself after it or reject it. But I didn't even, that option wasn't even available, because it just wasn't there.
Yeah. And this is exactly why representation is so crucial, especially now, you know, we're currently in 2020 and we're still fighting for having, you know, that equitable representation, whether it's in the media, whether it's in books, whether it's anything, you know. And so it was definitely so great to see you grace that cover of Canvas magazine. And I'm sure so many Black Māori women who saw it were just so, you know, excited. You know, they had someone to look up to, they had a positive role model. And I think a lot of people still can't grasp that importance, you know. So thank you so much for sharing that. So I just want to actually, now I'd like to just dig into like the Black Lives Matter movement. What were your first thoughts, you know, when the BLM protest occurred here in Auckland? How did you feel? Did you go? Can you tell us a little more about it?
Oh yeah, of course I went. My daughter and I went. We stayed the night in a hotel in the city the night before, so that we could get there, you know, in good shape. You know, I felt incredibly proud of the organizers. They pulled that together so quickly, and they just did it with such style and grace. And there was, you know, powerful activism, and yet so much joy, you know, like activism in the way that only Black people can do it. Like, you know, here you are, and you're in the middle of this march and you're dancing down the street for sheer joy. And, you know, there were moments when we were marching where I was just crying and thinking, you know, looking at my daughter and thinking, I'm so grateful that she gets to have that, and that experience of solidarity, and being able to look around and see, first of all, a whole lot of other Black people, you know, who look like her. But also that she was able to see Māori and young Māori and Pacific people, and even young Pākehā people coming out and, you know, showing solidarity in person, in body. You know, that's something that wouldn't have happened in my childhood, that has happened in hers. And so, you know, I'm grateful for that. It was incredible.
Yes, and just to expand on that, just recalling my own experience, I remember when I found out it was going on. And at the time, my best friend, who's also Black American from LA, shout out to you, Ricky, we went to the protest, and we were just dressed in Black on Black. We were just so happy. Like, I was definitely crying. I just couldn't believe the turnout. And it was just a blend of people, you know, and to think like I was like super hurt for what was going on in my country. And to just see, you know, a whole bunch of New Zealanders standing in solidarity with America. It was just, honestly, it was the most incredible experience that I've had since I've been here. And again, you know, coming from a Black American, like, oh my God, so appreciative, you know, so appreciative, and even so appreciative to be in this country and to be treated like that. It's just been, yeah, it's been really great.
But you know, that's us repaying the debt of gratitude that we owe to Black Americans. You know,
can you explain that?
People, you know, people of color, any oppressed people in the Western world, at some point in their activism owes a debt of gratitude to Black Americans and to what they have given us in terms of art, music, literature, scholarship, activism, you know, the unrelenting pursuit of justice that Black Americans have demonstrated has given the rest of us a template by which to, you know, model our own protest and our own activism, so that there are some things that work in the US that wouldn't work here, and there are some things that are not, you know, pertinent to us, but still we've had a model and a template available for us. You know, when you think about protests in Aotearoa in the 70s and 80s, you know, the soundtrack was African American music. It was Black American music that the protests were being, you know, that the sound was the soundtrack for those protests. Sorry, you know what I mean? Like when you were trying to formulate an identity around Blackness in the 70s and 80s, you were looking at African American singers and artists and actors, and that was who you had. You know, as I've gotten older, you know, I became resistant to being stuck in this box that says that there's only one definition of Blackness, and that's an American definition. But I still have a gratitude for what African Americans have given the world over. That's, you know.
Yeah, that's so heartfelt to hear as well. Yeah, that's awesome. I would actually say, so what do you think? What are your thoughts on, so I'm sure you're familiar with like the whole viral BlackOut thing, you know, everyone posting a Black square, you know, to be in solidarity of Black Americans.
Well, I know what you think.
You know, it just gets me so upset, you know. It's just like, you know, it's almost like, you know, we've been saying, hey, I'm oppressed. Hey, I'm oppressed. Hey, we're being oppressed over and over and over again for years and centuries and centuries. And now all of a sudden it's like white people have this gaze like, oh my God, Black people are dying. We've been dying. You've been murdering us, you know? So I guess, what is your take on all this performance, these performative posts, especially you have brands coming out doing this, just top like influencers like doing this? Like, what is your take on all this, like on this performative?
To be perfectly honest, I have no time for it, and I don't know that we need to give it any more airplay than it already gets. You know, those, I guess for me, those people are not on my feed anyway. I'm only following I'm only following artists, you know, and Black academics. So I'm not really following anyone else, so you know, they're not on my feed. But I just don't know that we need to give them any more time. We can acknowledge it as performative, and you know what, swipe it aside, like just move on. Exactly. We don't have time for that. We don't have time for that.
I agree. Or you know what? Sometimes I'll tell them, look, cut me a check, pay me my consultant fees, you know? So
yeah, I mean, I've got to tell you the number of emails I've had since, you know, since that Black Lives Matter march in Auckland, of people asking me to, you know, would you like to come and speak at our cafe about Black Lives Matter, you know? And I'm like, yeah, you know, these are people who've known me for years. And they think, you know, I was Black a year ago when I was hanging out with you. I was Black last month. I was Black before all of this. And you never once asked me about my experience of Blackness in this country. You never once asked me how it has been to grow up Black and Māori in Aotearoa. And now you want me to come be a spokesperson, you know, like, come on.
Exactly. And I think the worst part is they want you to do it for free, or they say, oh, you can have free exposure, or I give you a couple.
And they assume that my Blackness is the same, and my experience of Blackness is the same as someone who has lived in a Black body in the US, which is very different. And I would never take that platform from someone who's actually lived the experience of Blackness on US soil, you know?
And how is that different? Can you explain? I'm sure our viewers would like to hear from you. How is that different? How is the Black experience different in America than it is from Aotearoa?
I can't speak to the Black experience in America because I've only ever traveled through, and I try and get through as quickly as possible and get out the other side.
Amen. That's why I came to New Zealand.
Yes. It's always just a stopover. But the racism here that is much more covert and insidious. It's tucked into the corners of buildings, and it's embedded in a tone of voice rather than flat out right in language. But it's the change of tone when you see a person speaking to a white person, and then they'll turn and speak to someone who's Black with an African accent, and their tone changes and their body posture changes, and it's very subtle and much harder to call out because it's not as nameable as someone who comes at you with a Confederate flag, or it's not as easy to identify. It still needs to be identified, and it still needs to be rooted out.
Yes.
It's a lot harder to fight your enemy or the enemy being racism when it's ducking and weaving and
exactly. And I think for me, I'd like to use the word that always comes to mind is malice. And I don't know if this is a legal term here in New Zealand, but it is in the States. And it's just when you have that hatred or that intent, so it's like a deep rooted, embedded hate. And I feel like a lot of American people, it's just deep rooted racism, and we have these white supremacists who are our prosecutors, our attorneys, they're our police, our law enforcement officials, they're our doctors, and they're just disguised, and I think that's the most painful part, because you're giving these people, all of this false power. And I think it's so important for us to keep sharing our stories, keep sharing our experiences, no matter how many times people try to discredit us or, disagree with us or gaslight. Racial gaslighting is huge, try to diminish what we've experienced. And so I'm always grateful for people who tell their stories, and I always want to listen and hear more. So coming back to you, we know racism continues to be a battle here in New Zealand. And I understand you and your family had a recent incident. Would you like to share what happened to the viewers? If you don't mind, so kindly.
The incident itself was kind of not that surprising, out of the ordinary. My daughter was in high school class. Her white female teacher was talking about white supremacy, racism, separatism, and was paraphrasing Malcolm X's speech about house slaves and field slaves, and chose to use the N-word not once but multiple times, over and over again, despite the discomfort of the girls in the class. That doesn't come as any surprise to me. It's the kind of insidious nature of racism that I've come to expect in this country. But what I did find incredibly jarring was that the girls who were understandably upset, not just my daughter, who's the only Black child in the class, but the other girls were upset too, had gone home and told their parents, or some had messaged their parents, and the response was for the principal to come into the classroom and basically shut the conversation down. And really, and like you say, gaslighting, really strange ways of rationalizing the conversation, to point out things like it's a word in the English language and you can't just take a word out of the English language. It's just like the hashtag Me Too movement. Men say misogynistic things about women all the time, and we can't stop them. Just the most ridiculous ways of trying to couch this behavior behind something else.
And why do you think it's acceptable? Why do you think a lot of white people think this is acceptable?
I honestly think that white people are so used to owning everything.
Oh, thank you.
That
that's a whole word.
That they just feel like we own the language too. And how dare you tell us there's a word in the English language that we can't use? They're just used to owning everything, and they want to own the right to say a word. I mean, it's one word. You can't give that up.
Exactly. Just like when I say
know?
Black Lives Matter and someone has to come at me with all lives matter. Like, you know, we can never have something just for us. It always, I don't know, it just blows my mind. It just blows my mind.
I tell you, you know, as a whānau, we had a hui with the principal, and I have taken a complaint to the Human Rights Commission. I have written to the Board of Trustees of the school. So I'm trying to use the appropriate channels to address the issue, because the ultimate goal for me is change and a safe environment for my daughter. You know, I want her to be safe at school, and for me not to have to leave work to run and pick her up because she's in tears, feeling unsafe. But it was interesting that the principal gave us one solution when we went to the meeting as a whānau, and her solution was that the next time the World Views class is taught, my daughter could go and sit outside the dean's office at a table and chair and work on her own while the teacher continues to teach the class. I mean, I can't tell you how wide my mouth dropped open. But the irony that you would think that the solution to this problem is to segregate the one Black child out of the class while you discuss racism and separatism. It's just diabolical. I couldn't believe it. I was speechless for about 20 seconds, just thinking, oh my God, like.
Yeah. But you know what? I've had like, not something like this, of course, you know, really happened to me, but I've had times where I had like a light bulb moment. You know, I dealt with a lot of racism back in the States, especially in the workplace. So that's really what generally made me flee America and come to New Zealand, because I was just exhausted. You know, what racism does to the Black psyche is ridiculous, you know, to the point where what happened to me in the workplace paralyzed me in such a way. I stayed at home for 7 months, paralyzed by fear in my room. I didn't even enter the legal field anymore. So I haven't even been in the legal setting for 3 years now. And I would say I had a light bulb moment when my supervisor said something to me. She said, if you want to make as much money as us, go get another job. And she proceeded to tell me why Black people make less money than white people. And I remember I had this light bulb moment because everything in me wanted to deck her, you know, like punch her right in the face, right? But then I remember I was thinking, I was just like, I see what you're doing to me. You're provoking me. You want me to act crazy so you can go run. Yep, so I can say, oh, she's an angry Black woman. I told you, go look up her, her arrest history, or go look up her history, you know, all these things. And I said, okay, now I know what I'm gonna do, you know? So I think reading is something that really helped me. So when I see people combating racism with like looting and so much anger and malice, I can understand it, but I don't believe it should be done. You know, I think we're angry, but let us be wise. You know, what we have to do is start educating ourselves, start reading more books, you know, unlearning what was taught to us and relearning about our history. And what we do is we combat them with knowledge. You know, we know, and what we try to know at least almost everything they know, and go ahead and fight the system that way. Start dismantling systems that have been designated and that originate to keep us oppressed. But that's my take on it as well. And
that's where we might disagree. I think it's easy to combat with knowledge when you're in the safety of Aotearoa New Zealand. You know, we can combat racism with, you know, academic scholarship and with, you know, conversations like this, and with you know, even through an art practice. There's multiple ways that we can do it. But I think if I were living in a Black female body in the US right now, I would have had enough. And my way of demonstrating that I've had enough would have been to take to the streets. And I can't imagine that I would have sat at home going, let's just talk this out. You know, I think I would have joined the masses and made myself present.
Definitely, yes.
In the conversation that way, you know.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think where I was going at was like, I don't believe in burning buildings down and looting the streets. Definitely having your voice heard, being present, especially in this pivotal time in history. Definitely, and you know, marches, we've seen in the history that they have led to a lot of change. So I'm all for that. I think, everything that everyone's doing, keep protesting. I know the Black Lives Matter movement is currently not trending, but it needs to start trending again because we need the cops to arrest the killers that killed Breonna Taylor. So,
yeah, I hear what you're saying. Just to go back to the burning buildings, though, I think that's kind of a ruse. It's why are we more concerned about the loss of a building than we are about the countless Black American lives that have been lost?
Yes. Yeah.
How do you measure up a building versus a life?
I agree, and definitely agree with that. And I'm not trying to compare. I'm not trying to say burning a building is more important than the Black bodies that have been lost or the people that have been murdered. I'm just saying there are ways to go about things, and if it were me, I'm not saying, oh my God, let's get so angry and let's start doing X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z. But again, I'm saying I understand this anger,
Right.
So maybe, I don't know, so it's some misunderstanding there, but I completely understand what you're saying, Alvie. I definitely understand. And I'm not trying to discredit anybody for whatever way they want to protest. All of it is valid, so just putting my 2 cents in there.
Yeah.
But, I know, 30 minutes goes by so fast. I know we have about like 2 minutes left. I know, yeah, we are there.
We just got started.
We did. So I'm actually going to just give me one moment. I'm just going to check to see if there are any, questions online to see if I can just ask you more questions from our viewers.
Only ask me the good ones.
So, I will. Definitely, I'm going to sift through and just
just make them up
quickly. All right. Let me look.
I'm sure my mum will be on there asking a question.
Really?
She'll be like, when are you coming to visit?
Oh wow, so many comments. Oh my goodness. Okay. People are asking what school this is, but we're not going to go ahead and say that, you guys. Thank you, Marlena, for telling me not to cry. I love you. Let's see. No one's really asking a question. They're just saying this is horrible. Okay, but here's my last question for you, Alvie, before we close out. So we know we've educated our viewers. We told them that you're a Qoya teacher and you specialize in stunning virtual collages. Before we close out, do you have any piece of advice, something to leave our viewers with how they can keep the momentum, especially through this difficult moment in history, dealing with COVID-19, Black Lives Matter movement? I know there's so many people who are just depleted, exhausted. Do you have any tips or advice that they can take away today?
Yeah, go make art and get off social media. Seriously, apart from this, you should watch us, but then afterwards you should go. You know what I do? I've reduced down the number of people whose feeds I receive to a very few number, and they're people whose activism and scholarship I know to be trustworthy. That's a shout out to Joy Inamoto and Kim in Hawaii, who I know do the work. And so I can, in terms of what's happening in the US and what's happening around the world, there are just small groups of people who I allow to kind of enter my head in terms of knowledge about what's happening, and the rest I just ignore. My advice is to find ways to connect with others, connect with other people, to connect with the land. Get out and get barefoot on the land. And even if you're living in a city, go to the park and take your shoes off and stand barefoot. I think what would be really good if we had a whole lot of people walking around hugging trees right now instead of hugging their phones, looking for the latest update.
Oh, I just hugged
connect
a tree
with the
yesterday.
land, connect with other people, connect with your ancestors, and go within and connect with yourself. Connection is everything. In Māori we call it whakawhanaungatanga, the process of being in right relationship. It's the thing that will sustain you and hold you in good stead through all of this.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's been such a pleasure having the chance to chat with you. And again, thank you to our viewers. Thank you for tuning into our first episode. Be sure to catch us live next Sunday, while we'll be going live with Mes Swami, hailing from the Gardens of Eden, Sudan. He is actually a leading New Zealand musician, and he was one of the organizers of the BLM protest. So until next Sunday, 12 p.m. New Zealand time, my name is Diane Wesh, and you have been watching the BlackOut series. Bye.